Hi, I'm John, and in this episode you're going to learn how to install Episerver CMS. Episerver CMS was first released in 2002, the same year as the second generation iPod and Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. And in that time, things have come on leaps and bounds. Now, Episerver is one of the leading players in the .NET CMS market, and what this means for you is if you want to learn it, there's a good chance that you're going to work on some interesting projects. You might get to work with some AI and some e-commerce, and it also means that you'll be able to specialize and niche, which hopefully means that in your career you'll be able to make a lot more money. So the plan of attack in today's video is threefold. First, we're going to make sure that we configure Windows and we have everything installed. Next, we're going to install Episerver. And finally, we're going to configure and tweak our development environment for optimal usage. So the first thing we want to do is check that we have IIS installed and all the correct modules. To check this, we're going to go to the search at the bottom of our desktop. We're going to type in Windows features so we can find the turn Windows features on and off. When that loads up, we're going to make sure that Internet Information Services is ticked. This means IIS is installed. Then we're going to go to the World Wide Web Services section. In here, we want to go to Application Development Features, and we want to make sure that 3.5 and 4.8 is enabled. You then want to make sure that Application Initialization is enabled. We won't be using it in this video, but this is very handy when you're releasing your website. The next thing that we want to do is go down to our common HTTP features. In here, we want to make sure that the HTTP redirection is enabled. Again, we won't be using that in this video, but it's a very handy feature that you want to make sure is enabled. Your Episerver website will need a database to run. When it comes to installing the database, we have two options. Now, option one is to install the database within the file system, and this is the default option. For development purposes, this will do your head-in because it's not very optimal. It's very difficult to back up and restore your database. It's a bit harder to do your queries and it runs a little bit slower. Instead, what we want to do is run our database on a SQL Server. Now, I won't go through all the ins and outs of installing SQL Server in this video, but basically you'll need a SQL Server Express and you'll need the SQL Server Management Studio SSMS. Now, these are very easy to install, they're free, so just have a quick Google if you haven't already and install them now. So when it comes to configuring SQL Server for Episerver, there's one important thing that we'll need to do, and that is to make sure that we can use a username and password to log into SQL. Now, if we can't do this, then it means the Episerver website will not be able to talk back to the database. So to do this, open up SSMS and we can go to Connect. So the first thing we need to do is right click on our server and do Properties. Within our Properties, we want to go to this Security tab, and in here we want to make sure that SQL Server and Windows Authentication mode is enabled. Now, the next thing we'll need to do is make sure that we have a username and a password which can log into SQL. So if we go to this Security tab and go into Logins, what we'll see is we have this SA account. Now, for production, you should not use SA, but for development purposes, it's fine. So what we're going to do is right-click on SA. Now, assuming that you know your password, this is really important. The next thing we need to do is go to Status, and in Status, we need to make sure that the login is enabled. So to test that this works, what we do is click Disconnect. We do Connect. Now what we want to do is change this Windows authentication to SQL Server authentication. We've got SA. Now I'm going to type in my SA password. Click OK. Perfect. And as you can see, we've got access to our database. So now we're going to set up our Episerver website so we can start developing against it. So to install Episerver is pretty simple. What we're going to do first is install a Visual Studio extension which will do most of the hard work for us. So when we're opening Visual Studio, continue without code, we're going to go to our extensions, we're going to go to Manage Extensions. Within Online, we're going to do a search in here, we're going to search for Episerver. And as you can see, we have this Episerver CMS Visual Studio extension. We're going to download this. Okay, so after the extension has finished installing, do not forget to reset Visual Studio, otherwise you will not be able to see the changes. So So what we want to do to install our website now is go to create a new project. In here, and in the search for templates, we're going to type in Episerver. Now from here, we're going to see a new template. We're going to click next. In here, I'm going to call mine epi.local. For the location, I'm going to put it in my C drive code. I'm going to call it epi.local. I'm also going to make sure that we're using 472. Now, time to hit create. So when it comes to installing Episerver, we have 3 options. Now, if you're a pro, you might want to choose empty. This means you can create a really clean code base and you can do everything yourself. If you're starting out, I suggest that you use the Alloy MVC option. So we'll click that. Also, when you're installing Episerver, you can choose which search provider you use. Now, Episerver comes with something called Episerver Find, which is this really beefy SaaS product. For our example, we're just going to use Episerver Search, and we're going to click OK. So the installer is going to go and do its thing, and I'll join you shortly. After the installer has installed all the files, you should see this beautiful solution and project. Now the first thing we should probably do is build our solution just to make sure there's no errors. And the next thing is we'll click this IIS Express button just to make sure that the website loads and that everything has installed as we expect it to. So when the Alloy site first loads, you should see this create administrator account. Let's just quickly create some details. Okay, so do not be worried if you type in those admin details and you bump into this 404 screen. What we're going to do is remove register from the end, and as you can see, we have this beautiful sample site, and we can have a quick play around, click on a few links, everything works. Now what we want to do is make sure that we can log into the CMS itself. We do this by typing in Episerver. And this is Episerver CMS in action. We can click this dashboard, click on CMS. Here the editor should load. If we click on this little icon here, we'll be able to see all our pages. And this is CMS in action. So to create our entry in IIS, what we're going to do is go back to our desktop, click search, type internet, and then you can see we have Internet Information Services pop up. We're going to open that, and this is our IIS. Now in here, what we're going to do is expand this job, and in our sites, we're going to create a new website. Now our website is going to be called epi.local, and we need to have a physical path. This physical path needs to map to where our installer put our web files. So in my directory, this is the code, epilocal, and then epilocal. Click OK. And the one thing we haven't set up yet is a host name. So I'm going to call my host name epilocal. Now the idea of a host name is that instead of typing in something into a browser and it goes off to the internet, we use a host name, and what will happen is when we type in the host name into a browser, instead of going to the internet, it's going to redirect to our website within IIS. So if we click OK, what we can do now is just quickly check by hitting explore that our web files are loaded. Perfect. The other thing we should check now is that our application pool is set correctly. So if we go to epi.local, what we can see is that we have version 4.0 installed, and this is what we need to do. Okay, so to create a host file that our website can use, what we're going to do is open up File Explorer. We're going to go to Windows. Then we're going to navigate down to System 32. We're then going to go to Drivers. And then we're going to go to etc. In here, we're going to find a file called hosts, and we're going to open this with Visual Studio Code. Okay, so within Visual Studio Code, we can see that we have our entries. Now what we're going to do is create a mapping from our local IP, which is 127.0.0.1, and we're going to point it to our host name, which we're going to call epi.local. So for a quick zoom, 127.0.0.1 epi.local. Now we're going to hit save. When we hit save, what is likely to happen is we're going to get this insufficient permissions error. The good thing of doing this within Visual Studio Code is you can click this retry as admin and it will save us for us. Perfect. Now if we go back to IIS, what we want to do is go to our epi.local. We can then go to Edit Bindings. Within Edit Bindings, we can click on our website, click Edit, and we can check that our hostname is set. This means that we should have everything configured that we need, and what we can do now is do epi.local within a browser. Okay, so we've tried to load our website and now we've bumped into this network related error. Now this is a beautiful error which you may see from time to time, and what this basically means is that our SQL Server is not configured correctly. And this makes sense because at the moment we're using the database which is in our web root and we're not using one within SQL Manager. So let's change that. What we want to do is go over to our SQL Server, and in our app data you should see that we have this Episerver MDF. Now if we just open this up quickly, what we want to do is copy these MDF and LDF files. We're going to put them outside of our web root because we're sensible. We're going to create a file called database, and we're going to paste them in here. Now another thing we want to do is quickly make sure that we have the correct permissions, otherwise SQL will complain. So what we're going to do is add everyone. Again, we can use the correct permissions, but for this simple example we're just going to do that. Perfect. So now if we go back to our SQL Manager, so we're going to open up SSMS. Within here we can now connect to our database. Now in here what we're going to do is click Attach Database, and then within here we're going to click on this Add button, and now we're going to navigate to our database folder which I put in code, database. As you can see we have this Episerver DB. Click OK, and then click OK again. So if you encounter a access is denied error, there's a few ways to overcome it. Now, one of the first things we need to do is go to our database folder, and then if we go to properties down the bottom, and then security, edit. Again, we want to make sure that the everyone account has read and write permissions. This is a bit hacky, but we do need to make sure this happens. So when we click apply, perfect. Again, we want to do this advanced, replace all child object permissions. Now the other thing which I haven't done before is if we close this one down, what we want to do is make sure that we run SQL Express with admin privileges. Again, if we don't do this, then the program will not be able to write to the disk. So now we have our SQL Express, we reconnect. Now we can attach our database, click add, find our MDF, OK, and then let's quickly just do that one. Make sure that we're using the right files, and perfect, there we go, everything is attached. So now we want to probably give our database a bit of a more friendly name, so I'm going to call mine epi.local. Now that we have our database attached and working nicely within SQL Server, what we want to do is update our connection string within our web application to work. So when Episerver installs, it's going to use a connection string which points to a file within a web root. And what we actually want is to use a connection string which points to our SQL Server. So what I normally do is go to connectionstrings.com, and then within here we should be able to find our SQL Server example. And in here we can just copy this one. Now we can navigate back to Visual Studio. Now within here we've got our web root, so just open up your web root, and in here you'll have connection strings. So what we want to do is delete everything in here. Now I'm going to go back to my SQL Server quickly. I'm going to copy my server name. So now that we've made that change, let's see if the website works. So if you get this issue, do not worry. what I recommend that you do is first go to IIS. We can do a reset, or otherwise known as an IIS reset. And another thing we can do is log into our SQL account. When we have our database here, we can just go tasks and we can take offline. We can click OK. We can then go tasks, bring online. And this just makes sure that we flush out any connection strings and any details that we may have encountered when we're setting up our website. Now, if the website still does not turn on, the other thing you want to check is your connection string. So looking at our connection string, one thing that I have missed out is the multiple active results set equal true. So if we click save quickly and then do a refresh, let's see what happens. Cool, now as you can see, we have a website which is now working through a host name. Now, one thing that you may notice straight away is that we have this really beautiful license error. Now what we're going to do is quickly create a developer license for Episerver, which will get rid of this. So to create a developer license, what we're going to need to do is get our MAC address and then go over to the Episerver License Center and create one. So open up a terminal, we're going to do ipconfig/all. Now when we scroll to the top, what we're going to do is find a MAC address. So this will be your physical address, and we're going to copy this. So the next thing we're going to do is then head over to the License Center. Episerver License Center, and then we're going to get a new license. So we're going to select Episerver 7. Even though we're on a much later version than 7, no one's updated this drop down for ages. Now the company is John D. Jones, could be whatever you want. John. This company is for me, and then I'm going to put in my email address. We're going to select MAC address, and then we're going to paste in our value we got a minute ago. Not a robot. I'm going to click to my T's and C's, and I'm going to generate a demo license. Now very shortly I should get an email with a file. So next I'm going to take my license file, I'm going to head over and open up my webroot, and I'm going to put my license file in the webroot. Now I'm going to go back over to my website, and as you can see, my licensing error has now disappeared. Amazing. Okay, so I think the final thing I should tell you before we leave is how you should debug your website, because obviously now we're not using Cassini, you'll need a slightly different way of debugging. Now what we want to do is in Visual Studio, go to debug, and go to attach to process. So what I normally do now is hit process. So we're descending alphabetically, and then you need to make sure this show processes from all users is enabled. If it's not enabled, you're not going to be able to find the correct process. And what we want to do is navigate down here, and we're going to find this W3WP exe. And we can tell that we're on the right one because around here you can see it says epi.local, and this is basically what we want. So we're going to select this and do attach. And this is now us attached and ready to debug our website. So one little productivity tip is going through that process every single time is very long-winded. What you want to do is download an extension called reattach, and as you can see now I've got a very quick shortcut to reattach to that process. So to enable reattach or download it, just go to extensions, manage extensions, mine's installed, but just do a quick search for reattach. And then you will find it and download it that way. And there we have it. We have Episerver installed, and you should now be able to configure your development environment for optimal Episerver usage. So if you want to become a legend, hit subscribe or like, I would really appreciate it. If you do that, it will help this channel grow. If you want to learn more about Episerver, then head over to my website. It's called johndjones.com. On there are hundreds of Episerver tutorials which will get you everything you need to know. Now, if you want a more condensed version and you want to learn everything in a book and you want to support me, then you can also head over to LeanPub. I've created a book on Episerver called Episerver The Missing Manual. In there, it's about a 150 to 100 page book which will teach you everything you need to know how to build a website using Episerver CMS. Well, I hope this has been amazing for you. Happy coding.